Burn the flag! Burn the flag!
This is a major reform. We can't do that without having enormous potential ramifications.
We won't be giving up any water, and that's our position.
I need the best people I can possibly bring to the task to give it even a whiff of a hope of success.
Well, after 20 years, I guess the question is, will you actually achieve water reform, or will you squib it?
And so the saga continues, protecting Australia's greatest river system and the food it produces, and the decades of uninspired politics it has spawned. Welcome to Four Corners. The inquiry into the water management of the Murray-Darling Basin was a royal commission in 1902. More than a century later, with the river system in a critical state, the politics are as murky as the Murray. This issue has been building since the 60s, and in the dying days of his prime ministership, John Howard introduced the Water Act, establishing the Murray-Darling Authority to draw up a blueprint for the basin's survival. The Rudd government picked up the baton and persuaded the states to cede power to the Commonwealth to make it happen. But how much water to give back to the ailing river system without destroying the farmers and townspeople for whom the basin is an economic lifeblood? Late last year, the authority drew up a guide to what the blueprint might be, suggesting that between 3,000 and 4,000 billion litres per year should go back to the river. According to the science, that's the least it needs. The reaction was swift and angry, as you've just seen. And now the Gillard government is searching desperately for compromise and questioning the science. The old authority chairman has resigned, and Labor has turned to one of its own to put the matter to rest. Here is Marion Wilkinson's definitive report.
The big floods that swept through Australia did not just bring destruction. In the wetlands of our mightiest river system, they also brought an explosion of life. On this remote floodplain in the great Murray-Darling Basin, the ibis and spoonbills, ducks and cormorants returned en masse to feed and to nest. It's a rare privilege to see a breeding event so big in this part of the basin in Western New South Wales, where waterbird populations have fallen dramatically.
When I used to fly over it in the mid-80s, it's still very wet then, people used to describe it as Little Kakadu. And I just remember these amazing numbers of birds. What we've seen over the period between the early 1980s through the 1990s and 2000 is almost an 80% decline in waterbird numbers. Now, obviously, they're still going up and down with the floods when they come along, but those bounces back, if you like, aren't nearly as high as they used to be.
Restoring the health of the Murray-Darling Basin has been a decade-long battle in Australia. But this year, irrigation communities throughout the basin are being forced to confront unprecedented cuts to their water. The largest water reform plan in the nation's history is being drawn up, and those responsible are feeling the pressure.
This is a major enterprise, a major area of public policy. People tell me it's one of the only times ever in the world it's been attempted on this scale.
This is a major reform. People, depending upon which side of the fence they sit on, either talk about it as a major environmental reform, but it's also a major social and economic reform. We can't do that without having enormous potential ramifications in the community.
It's not going to be science, and it's going to be, the loss of X jobs. How's that compare against the loss of a species? It's that sort of subjective. It is difficult, there's no doubt. This weighs heavily on my mind, but there must be a position.
The amount of water needed to keep the rivers healthy in the Murray-Darling system is now in bitter dispute.
The big players in the game are the irrigation industry and the environment. And the political decisions that will need to be made around the basin plan are really fundamentally about the big decision about the water shares.
The position is that we won't be giving up any water, and that's our position.
We're not going to give up anything. We're going to fight for our rights, and we'll march on Parliament, we'll march wherever we've got to go.
If you want a riot in Australia, if you want people who are very balanced, stoic, really mind their own business, pay their taxes and never bother anybody, to be out burning books like they did before, then go forward with the draft as it is.
The Murray-Darling Basin spreads out over 1 million square kilometres, from Queensland to South Australia, and the battle over its water is shaping up as epic. Taking in the Darling River to the north and the Murray to the south, the basin is one of the world's greatest water catchments, covering 23 different river valleys and 30,000 wetlands. The basin is also home to 2/3 of the nation's irrigated farmland. 2 million people live in this food bowl and 3 million depend on it for drinking water. After more than a century of irrigation and a decade of drought, all but 3 of its river valleys are now officially classed as in poor or very poor condition. Until the recent floods, there was precious little water to wash the huge quantities of salt in the system out through the mouth of the Murray in South Australia.
Not flowing to the ocean is not the major issue, but of course exporting salt is. We've seen increased water quality issues, blue-green algal blooms in recent years. Those sort of issues will continue. We've got declining health of the red gums. We've got loss of significant wetlands. Those issues will only continue without addressing this problem.
It is awful, isn't it? Yes.
In the depths of the drought, John Howard first flagged a multi-billion-dollar plan to make big cuts to irrigation water in the Murray-Darling Basin.
This is our great opportunity to fix a great national problem. It can only be solved if we surmount our parochial differences.
He promised a new Water Act that created the Murray-Darling Basin Authority and cut through state rivalries. Its key task, to come up with a plan for the government to get more water back into the rivers, a promise matched by Labor.